times hearing. Do I have to? Okay. I recall many times hearing the story of St. Paul being knocked off his horse while on his way to persecute Christians. But I honestly did not remember the part about him being blinded until Ananias laid his hands on him. The rest, as they say, is history, as Paul went on from villain to hero of the church after this healing experience. As an aside, I have not yet read Eileen's book, and I can only wonder what she'll do with and to St. Paul. Likewise, the story in Mark's Gospel of Bartimaeus is similarly familiar to many of us. He's a blind beggar sitting by the roadside, and when he hears that Jesus is passing, calls out to him for pity. Jesus, never wasting the chance for a teaching moment, doesn't immediately meet his need, but rather asks him the obvious, "What do you want?" You can wonder what was behind this. Was Jesus testing Bartimaeus' faith by his question? Did he have to make Bartimaeus ask for the obvious? Maybe he wanted a dramatic moment for the crowd to see as he responded. And as he responded to Jesus' question with the desire to see, poof, Jesus miraculously made it happen. Has anyone experienced a majestic healing like that? I know I have not. Although my early religious training, we were taught to ask God for what we wanted. And I have to confess many times having asked for the ordinary, please help me pass this Latin test, or the extraordinary, please help me win that race, which was both as equally outrageous, impossible. And I would assume this would include healing. And do we not every week, even here, pray for the intentions of our loved ones, many times asking for physical healing? And here's and I'll share, this is somewhat my troubling journey in this regard. When someone is healed, we often give thanks, sometimes publicly, for the intention that we prayed for. So now I'll stray and become a bit blasphemous, but I have to ask, when the intention is not granted, when the illness or malady not cured and the problem not solved, even when a loved one dies, do we turn around and say, well, no thanks, God? I've not heard anyone say that, but I think sometimes there's the feeling. I mean this question seriously, but certainly not blasphemously. That's a tough word to keep saying. Or disrespectfully, as I indicated previously. But rather it reflects my own search and challenges as to what intercessory prayer means, at least for me, and why it still makes sense. And I don't propose to offer this as a view or solution that I suggest you adopt, rather than in the spirit of the community with so much wisdom to share as fellow pilgrims. I'll ask you to offer your own views of this in hopes that collectively we can deepen our faith and understanding of the mystery of the divine. So I'll do so by sharing a very personal story of our family that was, among other things, transformational in my faith life. In 1986, when Mimi was 9 months pregnant with our 5th child, our then youngest, Sarah, who was only 18 months old, was diagnosed with cancer. After surgery, she began chemotherapy. And as with a young and very tiny person like that, dosing and strong medicine engaging are very difficult for a toddler. She went into shock and was almost comatose and unresponsive for quite some time. And we faced the reality that we might lose her. Dark days indeed, and the outcome was hard to imagine. So I'm going to pause. I don't want the drama of that experience to overshadow the message and experience I'm trying to share today. So as a spoiler alert, I'll let you know, it's only fair to tell you that next week, Sarah celebrates her 40th birthday and has the vibrant mother of 3 healthy boys. So I continue. During those dark days of keeping vigil at her bedside, Mimi and I took turns taking a breather to step away, perhaps for coffee in the lobby, and many times, I know both of us, to slip into the small chapel off of the atrium. It was there where I'll say my first prayer conflict arose. It became my personal Gethsemane, where I figuratively sweat blood praying for my child's well-being. And while there's nothing wrong with doing that, in my distorted sense of agony, I was led to believe, and as my own feeling, I felt that she could only be healed if my prayer were fervent and worthy enough, if only my faith and belief were unshaken. In hindsight, I realized it could be considered an egotistical approach, though that was nowhere near my intention, where I was trying to control the outcome and maybe God by virtue of my worthiness. Nevertheless, it seems like an approach of view that would be conditioned by my religious experience, and I don't know if others experienced that as well. Those were certainly torturous sessions, as you can imagine, and in hindsight, hardly what I feel a loving God would want or ask for under those circumstances. I can't say when or how my metamorphosis in this process began, but along the way, we met many other parents who were similarly devoted and loving and desired the same outcome we did. Some like us were fortunate in their outcome, but others sadly were not. I'm not sure how the light came on for me at first, and it was not a bright light that came on all at once, but rather a gradual process. My prayer eventually turned from a request for healing, and certainly God knew my desire without my having to beg for it, unlike Bartimaeus, but rather very simply a request for grace and strength to deal with the situation, to be strong, to be support for my wife and family and other children, and most importantly, to be able to accept and deal with the outcome. It was here that I began to feel a peace, even at the same time going through emotional turmoil. It wasn't magic, and it didn't take the turmoil away, but it was like giving me a buoy to hold on to in the churning sea. Strange to say, but I guess I was experiencing a gift of faith in that transformation that enabled me in turn to ask for the grace that I needed. And we like to say, God works in mysterious ways, doesn't she? So prayer takes many forms and serves many needs, and I don't mean to imply that this is singular. From contemplative and centering prayer to chanting, to the prayer we share in our weekly worship service here. So I'm not suggesting that this prayer is singular or sufficient or in any way comprehensive. Rather, I share it as my response and approach to that one form of healing prayer that we hear about and share in today's readings. And I must confess a bit of inconsistency in my prayer practice, and can still partake in petitioning prayer with the best of them. As an example, you need only ask St. Anthony to look at my ledger. And despite my best petitioning, I found out sadly this fall that God was not a Phillies fan. So, nonetheless, I want to leave you with this lesson that I learned and invite our members to share their own views and experiences. And again, I must emphasize I'm sharing only my personal experience and view and would not in any way diminish those with a different approach or philosophy. So as my final observation, I would say for me, I have found that I view the benefit of petitioning prayer as not changing the world for me, but hopefully changing me for the world.